This is Garis book readings of my two published paper books written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This is chapter 1, part 3 of my book, second book, entitled Multis and Monos, What the Multicultured Can Teach the Monocultured Towards the Creation of a Global State. Continuing straight on from part 2. However, with a powerful internet, it will become technologically possible for everyone on the planet to be provided with the media of the whole planet. That is, every TV channel on the planet could be brought into the living room of every person on the earth, or at least at first in the richer countries. As mentioned above, such a world media is labelled global media, in this book. It's a term that will be seen frequently in the coming chapters. This book will elaborate on this idea extensively, given its critical importance for converting monos into multis. With the global media will come the development of a global language, almost certainly to be English, so that ideas can travel rapidly across the planet. People's minds will be expanded from being national to being global, because the media they are exposed to every day will be global and understandable. This media will be hypnotically seductive due to technological advances. For example, the images will be in 3D and with very high resolution, so that the images will look as real as the real world. People will be able to be virtual tourists, sitting in their own armchairs in their living rooms and travel the world with their vids, that is, three-dimensional video sets. People's minds are strongly influenced by what they absorb on the mass media. If that media is no longer monocultured but global, presented largely in a world language, then inevitably the millions/billions of people exposed to it will become more cosmopolitan, more multi, more interculturally sophisticated. These people will then be exposed to the views, attitudes, customs, habits, etc. of many other cultures, which will cause them to question their own. Millions of minds will thus be expanded by being made multi. They will be multified. Multification will free people. If millions of people start looking at a particular custom of their own monoculture as somehow inferior, then they are much more likely to reject it and adopt what they see as being a superior custom as seen on the glow media. C. From multis to globals, or globans. The above multification process, due largely to the creation of a global media, can be generalized, so that not only will we see millions of people becoming multis, they will become globals or globans once a global state has been created. Take the case of a multi who has lived in 2 countries. There are millions of such people in the world now, and with cheaper and more effective mass transport, the percentage of people in the world who have lived in 2 or more cultures keeps rising. It's therefore not surprising that a growing consciousness amongst multis has arisen. Multis tend to prefer the company of other multis because multis are more interesting, have broader views of the world, and are more culturally tolerant than monos. Once people have lived in 2 cultures, they become multis and are then in a position to absorb the superiorities of the second culture into their personalities and to reject the inferiorities of their first culture. Of course, for this to be possible, these people need to be exposed to the alternatives of a second culture. In the world at the time of writing, I think that was about 2007 or so, to become a multi virtually necessitates living in a second or subsequent culture. But with glow media, with 3D images almost as good as the real world, travel and living in other cultures will be made much easier. People will be able to talk with each other in the world language, across continents, and in vivid 3D images. This will have a profound effect on people's minds. It will make possible the globification of the planet. That is, it will cause millions and later billions of people to think globally. They will no longer be limited by the narrow-minded conceptions of a monocultured media. They will think globally, not nationally. Once this happens, then simply being a multi will no longer be enough. The glow media will make possible the globification of the planet and of the individuals who absorb it. Such people are labelled globans in this book. Thus we can claim that globans are to multis as multis are to monos. Globans will think globally. They will not identify themselves so much with their traditional nation state, but shift their loyalties and viewpoints to a global state. They'll be much more inclined to be sympathetic to other like-minded globans than to monos, whom the globans will perceive as rather selfish and very narrow-minded, with blinkered, ignorant mentalities. Thus it's likely this century that we will see the mass globification of billions of people as the technologies allow it. This shift in the national versus global attitudes of billions of people will make the formation of a truly global state much more likely, which is the topic of the next section. D. Globa, that's G-L-O-B-A, the idea of a global state. The major idea of this book is that humanity should construct a global state this century, and perhaps even by mid-century. There are so many advantages to living in a global state compared to our current sovereign nation-state system, that it is a goal that we should push for strongly, given that our 21st century technologies will make it practical. Given its practicality, we then have to make it happen. Billions of people will need to be convinced that it's preferable to live in a global state, that we call globa, G-L-O-B-A, than in a traditional sovereign nation state or country. Hence, to accelerate this persuasion, an appropriate ideology is needed, which in this book is labelled globism. This book is a globist book. It's aimed at persuading its readers to adopt a globist philosophy, a globist political outlook, and then hopefully to see millions of people in the next few decades pushing towards globist creation by becoming globists themselves, forming globist political parties, etc. However, before a global state can be created, those technological, economic, social, etc. forces that are pushing in the direction of its creation need to become stronger. Chapter 5 lists and discusses these forces that will probably make the creation of a global state inevitable, given enough time. But creating a global state will not be easy, even if it's technologically practical. There are considerable counter-forces, as discussed in Chapter 7, which will resist, and perhaps even resist powerfully, its creation. It would be naive to assume that creating the most powerful political unit that has ever existed in human history will be straightforward. There will be conservatives, the anti-globists, who will despise the idea of a global state and fight against its creation. They will have their nationalist ideologies and values and will need to be overcome by the globists. It's thus to be expected that there will be ideological clashes in the coming decades between the nationalists and the globists. This clash need not be military in nature. One of the many topics discussed in this book is that of the phenomenon of global democratization. At the time of writing, it was 2007 or so, 120 plus countries, I think it's now around about, when I say now, about 2017, I think it's now around about 130. So 120 plus countries in the world are already democratic, with multi-party elections. Democratic countries do not go to war with each other, so any nationalist-globist ideological clash would be settled mostly by the ballot box. In about 40 years from the time of writing, it's probable that almost all nations on the planet will be democracies. For example, see Figure 1 in Chapter 3. So then any creation of a global state will be a voluntary process. There will be no more dictatorships in the 21st century to force the creation of a global state. Almost certainly a global state will be created incrementally by using very probably the accretion model as discussed in Chapter 8. In my view, the most probable route to the creation of global will be via the expansion of the EU, European Union. As more countries join the EU, it will need to change its raison d'etre from being a European club of nations to serving as the major stepping stone towards the creation of a global state. Thus the EU will need to change its name and its self-conception. This alone will imply a major shift in ideological viewpoint. There will be conservatives in the EU who will oppose globalism and resist its rise, especially using the EU as the vehicle to its creation. Of course, there are other routes to creating a global state besides the expansion of the EU route. Many of them are discussed in Chapter 8. Other chapters in the book deal mainly with ideas on what institutions a global state would need, what their agenda would be, and what impact their creation would have on people's lives. The creation of Globa will be one of the most significant political events of the century, in fact in all of history, but it's not a new idea. In case some readers feel that the idea of building a global state is novel, then the next section shall disillusion them of that impression. The dream of creating a global state has been around for thousands of years, but of course it has always remained a pipe dream due to the overwhelming strengths of the many counter forces against it. But this century, it's no longer a pipe dream. In the next few decades, we will have the technological means to make the dream a reality. One of the major goals of this book is to convince you of that. E. History of ideas for creating a global state. This rather long section presents some of the history of ideas on the creation of a global state. As will quickly be seen, people have been dreaming of creating a global state for many centuries. In the past, these ideas have seemed like pipe dreams. It's only this century that the creation of a global state seems at long last to be realistic and obtainable. Each person or institution mentioned below proposed some kind of quasi or global, or at least European, state. I obtained this information from an informative little book entitled A Global Parliament, Principles of World Federation by Christopher Hamer, an Australian theoretical physicist who has a similar background to mine. I quote or paraphrase below whole paragraphs of his, so I am indebted to him. In fact, I'm doubly indebted to him since he kindly agreed to write the foreword of this book that you have probably already read. 1. Socrates. Socrates, the famous ancient Greek philosopher and teacher of Plato who lived 2,400 years ago, is known to have said, "I am not an Athenian or a Greek, but a citizen of the world." 2. Dante. Dante, the Italian author of The Divine Comedy, with its graphic descriptions of the horrors of hell, Inferno, lived in the 13th century. He thought that the Holy Roman Empire, supported by the authority of the Church, might provide an authority analogous to the Roman Empire that could provide a supranational authority to preserve the peace between nations. 3. Pierre Dubois. Dubois was a lawyer and advisor to Philip IV of France, who in 1306 proposed in his treatise, I guess this is Latin, De Recuperatione Terra Sanctae, or maybe Italian. I guess Latin. The recovery of the Holy Land. That an alliance between the Christian states of Europe be formed that would be led by France, which would keep the peace between the states of the alliance and reconquer the Holy Land from the Muslims. Each sovereign would swear an oath to keep the peace. Dubois proposed the creation of a permanent court of arbitration that would adjudicate disputes between the states and a general council convened by the Pope to discuss common problems. 4. Georges Podiebrad, Podiebrad. Podiebrad was the king of Bohemia in the 15th century. He proposed the creation of a European assembly of princes that would have a court and a treasury. He wanted to see a holy war against the Turks. 5. Erasmus, Pope Leo X, Cardinal Wolsey, W-O-L-S-E-Y. Erasmus, the famous Dutch medieval scholar who lived in the 16th century, as well as the Italian Pope Leo X and the English Cardinal Wolsey, all advocated that the European nations should ally themselves with a universal treaty which would arbitrate disputes and apply collective sanctions against transgressors. The aims of the treaty were to defend themselves against the Turks and to assure peace amongst themselves. 6. Duc de Sully, that's S-U-L-L-Y. In 1617, the Duc de Sully, former chief minister to Henry IV of France, produced a similar scheme to the three above, which he called the Grand Design of Henry IV. He proposed that the Habsburg Empire be dismembered, and then a great federation be formed of all the hereditary monarchies, elective monarchies, and republics of Europe. The aims of the federation would be to preserve peace amongst themselves, and, once again, to attack the Turks. Note at the time, the Turks were a major threat to the Europeans. He proposed to settle religious problems that each state would choose a single religion, either Catholic, Lutheran, or Calvinist. His federation would be governed by a Senate of 66 persons, commissioned every 3 years from the participating states. 7. Emmerich Cruce, C-R-U-C-E. At about the same time as Duc de Sully, a French scholar named Cruce, C-R-U-C-E, published another scheme called the New Cyneas, that's C-Y-N-E-A-S, which emphasized that war could be entirely superseded by a regulated system of arbitration. He proposed the inclusion of non-Christian states, even the Turks, who would rank second to the Pope, in his proposed league. 8. Hugo Grotius. Grotius was the great Dutch jurist. In 1625, he wrote his famous treatise, De Jura Belli ac Pacis, The Laws of War and Peace, which is thought to be the historical basis of modern international law. This book went through dozens of editions and was a leading textbook for centuries. In it, Grotius discussed the idea of natural law, that is, law established by mutual consent between the members of a society aimed at the common good. From this was derived the law of nations, that is, there is some law common to all nations which applies both to the initiation of war and to the manner in which war should be carried on. He laid down permissible rules for the conduct of a war. He called for clemency and victory as the only way to a just and lasting peace. He did not, however, propose any way in which the law might be enforced, but relied on mutual consent and good faith among the nations. Grotius's ideas became the cornerstone of the peace treaties of Westphalia, which ended the 30 Years' War in Germany in 1648. Lawyers mark this date as the beginning of the era of the modern nation-state. Holland has remained the centre of international law ever since. For example, the World Court is currently located in The Hague. 9. William Penn. William Penn was the son of Admiral Sir William Penn, a high official in the British Navy under Charles II. The younger Penn became a Quaker, and in payment of debts owed to his father, the British Crown gave him some land in the American colonies, where he founded a model colony called Pennsylvania, with Philadelphia, City of Brotherly Love, as the capital. He drafted a constitution for the colony which provided an assembly elected by all taxpayers and guaranteed religious toleration, advanced ideas at the time. In 1692, during the wars of the Grand Alliance against Louis XIV, Penn wrote a well-known essay called Towards the Present and Future Peace of Europe, which stated clearly the guiding principle that government is from society and society from consent. He was influenced by Grotius and by the British philosopher John Locke, in the sense that a government be established by the mutual consent of society. Penn then proposed that the sovereign princes of Europe, or their delegates, should agree to meet in a European Parliament and to establish rules of justice for the princes to observe one to another and thus prevent war. The meetings were to occur once a year, and if any sovereign should refuse to submit to the judgment of the Parliament, then the other sovereigns should unite as one strength to compel his submission. The Quakers and other religious sects have been at the forefront of movements for world peace and the abolition of slavery. 10. Abbé de Saint-Pierre. A little later in France, the Abbé de Saint-Pierre made an elaborate proposal called A Plan for Perpetual Peace, for the creation of a federation of European states designed to settle disputes peacefully, following on from the ideas of Sully. Unfortunately, he chose to present his ideas in a Cartesian lemma theorem proof style from geometry that made his work unreadable. 11. Rousseau. In 1761, Saint-Pierre's ideas were taken up by the famous political philosopher of the French Enlightenment and Revolution, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who disagreed with Saint-Pierre, saying that the federation should be run by the citizens of the member states, not by the rulers, because the citizens bear the cost of war, while the rulers reap the glory. In a later commentary of his called Criticism on Perpetual Peace, he expressed his fear that the plan would never be adopted due to the selfishness of kings. 12. George Washington. The American War of Independence led to the federation of 13 former British colonies into the United States of America in 1788. The event was seen as an example to Europe, although it occurred on a smaller scale and amongst a more homogeneous population. George Washington, the US's first president, wrote, "I am a citizen of the great Republic of Humanity. We have sown a seed of liberty and union, which will gradually spring up throughout the earth. One day, on the model of the United States of America, there will be created the United States of Europe." 13. Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, or in German Kant, thought by many to have been the greatest and deepest thinking philosopher to have ever lived, also wished to live in a Europe of free republics, which should bind themselves to one another in friendly pacts, and thus ensure perpetual peace. Quote, "At the tribunal of reason," quote, he wrote, "there is but one means of extricating states from the turbulent situation in which they are constantly menaced by war, namely to renounce like individuals the anarchic liberty of savages, in order to submit themselves to coercive laws, and thus form a society of nations, which would insensibly embrace all the nations of the earth." He felt that the law of nations shall be founded on a federation of free states. 14. Jeremy Bentham. During the Napoleonic Wars, the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham thought that peace would ensue if England and France both disarmed and gave up their overseas colonies. 15. Comte de Saint-Simon. In France, the Comte de Saint-Simon proposed in 1814 that the establishment of a European federation should begin with the union of England and France, who were at the time the most democratic of powers, to be joined gradually by other nations. Saint-Simon proposed a democratic parliamentary system based on the English model that would consist of a European government, complete with a king, a House of Lords, and House of Commons, with similar governments for each of the subsidiary nations. Saint-Simon's ideas were greatly influential and foreshadowed some important modern schemes. 16. Krause. That's Krause. In 1811, the German religious philosopher Karl Christian Friedrich Krause first distinguished the concept of European federation and worldwide government in his Das Urbild der Menschheit, that's the archetype of humanity in German. He proposed regional federations of Europe, Asia, Africa, America, and Australia. The European Federation would use the German language, with its capital in Berlin. Each regional federation would be part of a sovereign world republic, with its capital in Polynesia, exclamation mark, question mark. His ideas were the harbinger of modern trends towards regionalism. 17. Tsar Alexander I. Tsar Alexander I of Russia, whose country was nearly overrun by Napoleon's Grande Armée, was interested in maintaining peace, so he proposed his Holy Alliance, led by Russia, Austria, and Prussia, which aimed at promoting Christian principles and would obligate all nations to the arbitration of disputes. Unfortunately for the Tsar, his alliance later became seen as a bulwark of autocracy. 18. Metternich. Metternich was a German-Austrian politician and statesman, and one of the most important diplomats of his post-Napoleonic era. His Concert of Europe with Castlereagh maintained peace on the European continent for many years. It began as an alliance of the great powers which had been victorious over Napoleon, that is, Austria, Prussia, Great Britain, and Russia. Their leaders met at a series of congresses and conferences in the years after 1815 to discuss international problems and take measures to maintain the peace. The concert was the forerunner of both the League of Nations and the United Nations, and established a pattern that has persisted until the present day. 19. Baha'i, that's B-A-H-A-I, Baha'i faith. The Baha'i faith is an offshoot of the Shiite Islamic religion of the Middle East, which got off the ground in the mid-19th century. One of its central concepts is its belief in a new world order in which the peoples of the world will be united to live together in peace and harmony. The earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. There are some 4 million Baha'i faith adherents at the time of writing, hoping wherever they can to bring about this new world order. An analogy can be made with the teachings of the Baha'i faith and those of the Quakers. 20. Kang Yu-wei. The Chinese scholar Kang Yu-wei, the family name is Kang, looked forward to the establishment of a Confucian era of peace and equality. Now that we seek to save the human race from its miseries, to bring about the happiness and advantages of complete peace and equality, to seek the universal benefits of one world, we must begin with the destruction of state boundaries and the abolishment of nationalism. 21. Quakers. After the Industrial Revolution had started, the notions of peace and progress were commonplace. In 1815, the first peace societies were established by the Quakers and other religious groups. The themes they established are still current in today's peace movements. 22. William Ladd.